Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Have you ever just stopped and really questioned the most fundamental story of how we actually got here? Well, today we're unpacking a very specific, highly provocative piece of writing by author Zhu titled Did Life Evolve from Non-Life? We're going to neutrally and systematically map out his entire philosophical critique of the theory of evolution. We'll be looking directly at his arguments, his logical deductions, and the ultimate conclusions he draws from just observing the world around us. It's fascinating stuff, so let's get right into it. To make sense of all this, we're going to follow a really clear logical path today. We'll start with the origin of life paradox, then define his core tenets of evolution, walk through his 10 extreme deductions, look at the unchanging human form, and wrap up with a call for contemplation.
All right, part 1, the origin of life paradox, focusing on those really foundational questions.
So Xu begins his critique right at the absolute beginning of existence. He immediately rejects the Big Bang Theory, and he rejects the idea that life could just arise accidentally from water. Instead, he sets up this massive foundational dilemma. Without an initial birth of life, a true starting point, can evolution actually exist? He uses that classic age-old question to illustrate this, the chicken and the egg. His core argument here is that an evolutionary process cannot mathematically or literally logically begin from zero. Something had to be there to kickstart the whole chain.
And this brilliantly illustrates his next point, but down at a microscopic level. He essentially takes that chicken and egg paradox and applies it directly to biochemistry. Xu points out the biological dilemma that the formation of DNA entirely depends on the presence of protein. But on the flip side, without initial protein, DNA cannot form. So he asks this massive, almost impossible biochemical question. Which came first? How could this entire evolutionary process possibly even begin without either of these incredibly complex structures already fully formed and functioning?
Moving right along to Section 2, the core tenets of evolution exactly as defined by the author.
So having established those initial paradoxes, the author explicitly defines the rules of evolution so he can build out his logic tree. He states that evolution requires pre-existing life forms that diversified, and that this was driven by heredity, variation, and natural selection. But notice exactly how he characterizes this whole process. He explicitly links evolution to the law of the jungle. He defines a system where environmental adaptation literally forces species to change, and brutally, where the weak are eliminated. This intense focus on survival of the fittest is the absolute bedrock for his next set of arguments.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 10 extreme deductions, where we actually follow this logic to its end.
Now, the natural question here is, if we accept these tenets, especially that brutal law of the jungle, where does Xu believe this logic ultimately leads humanity? Well, he extrapolates these rules into 10 extreme deductions. On the biological side, he deduces things like earthworms and humans sharing common ancestors, or that insects will eventually have to evolve into birds just to survive. But on the moral and societal side, the deductions turn incredibly severe. He argues that applying survival of the fittest to humanity directly implies that strong nations must eliminate the weak, and that plundering is inherently justified as a simple survival mechanism.
He actually synthesizes those societal extremes into one really specific, sweeping claim. Xu writes, quote, "All plundering and killing wars in history align with the theory of evolution." It's absolutely vital to understand his argument here. He is completely equating a biological theory with the inherent justification of historical human atrocities. He's arguing that you simply cannot separate the biological law from the sociological outcome.
Now this leads to what is absolutely the most extreme moral deduction the author makes. We're presenting this quote entirely neutrally, exactly as it appears in the text, to map his philosophical structure. Xu states this not as an endorsement, but as a devastating logical critique. His argument is that if the law of the jungle and the literal elimination of the weak are the fundamental truths of our existence, well then, the most horrific acts in human history are logically validated by that very science. By highlighting this massive extreme, he intends to show the fundamental, foundational flaw he sees in evolutionary theory.
Let's pivot back to biology for a second, because his deduction J paints a wildly vivid, honestly kind of absurd picture. He proposes that if humans are continuously evolving for better survival, then eventually wings will grow on our backs, eyes will pop up on the back of our heads, and yeah, we'll emit laser light and breathe fireworks. It's a crazy image, right? But he's purposely using this highly exaggerated imagery to completely mock the idea of limitless biological transformation.
Okay, on to Section 4, the unchanging human form, or the evidence of constancy.
Having laid out all those theoretical extremes, Xu pivots straight from theory into physical reality.
He challenges evolution by simply observing our current state. He sets up a really stark contrast between what we should expect and reality. Think about it. If evolution were actively improving our survival traits, he argues, human babies would be born ready to run like deer to escape predators. But the reality, according to Xu is that our physical essence is completely unchanged. Our ancient ancestors had 2 eyes and red blood, just exactly as we do today.
Xu makes a really fascinating distinction here to explain why humans seem so incredibly advanced today compared to our past. I mean, we're building skyscrapers and using smartphones, right? But he claims this is actually an illusion of biological evolution. Our increased capability depends entirely on accumulated knowledge that gets passed down through generations. Technologically, sure, we are advancing rapidly. But biologically, he argues we are completely static.
And finally, Section 5, a call for contemplation and what comes next. So, after breaking down the chicken and egg paradoxes, the brutal jungle rules, those intense extreme deductions, and his take on physical evidence, Xu concludes that the theory of evolution sits on a highly questionable, fragile foundation. But he doesn't just drop the mic and end the conversation there. He explicitly states his intention to explore this huge topic much further in his future writings. Specifically, he points his audience toward the greatest creator chapter of Lifechanyuan for some deeper answers.
So we're going to leave you with this final thought, based directly on Xu critique. Does the massive, rapid accumulation of human knowledge truly mask a static, totally unchanging biological reality? Or are the author's logical extremes, the laser eyes, the biological justifications of warfare, simply a profound misunderstanding of how the mechanism of evolution actually operates out in nature? It's a really heavy question, and honestly, it's exactly the kind of deep contemplation the author wants to provoke. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you. Catch you next time.